As I mentioned before in the chapter How the Web Works, understanding how HTML and CSS works is important. Just a reminder, the web has HTML documents that can optionally be styled with CSS documents when they are identified by unique URLs. As you can link documents to any HTML document, its location doesn't matter, whether on the web server or in a different server. Afterwards, they are then transported through the HTTP protocol to the client's web browsers. When styling the HTML, the browser takes the HTML file, interprets, and applies the styles as said in the CSS document. That's the way CSS works cooperatively with HTML. Similar to writing HTML, creating CSS could be done from scratch using any text editors like Sublime Text or Notepad, or even using an integrated development environment or IDE like VS Code, Eclipse, or WebStorm. Let's write a CSS with Sublime Text Editor. It recognizes the CSS standard after the file format has been selected. Additionally, through many formats and simple prompts like autocomplete, Sublime Text supports a lot of scripting languages like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and PHP, and is also able to show different colors for the different parts of the document, properties of the used fonts to help reduce errors and a faster development. And once I start typing, you can see its prompt and auto-completion as shown. For instance, when looking for font styles, when I type font style, it shows me off the possible properties that have the word font in them, then off the font styles for this property. This is really helpful to speed up my work. Another way of using CSS is to use CSS from a library. These are ready-to-use CSS files with styles that have been scripted by other people. They already contain a lot of styles that you can use in your HTML document. There are lots of CSS libraries around, and most of them are open source and free. Some contains only CSS styles. Others contain a lot more stuff, like JavaScript files, images, and more. A very popular option is Bootstrap, but there are others like Tailwind CSS. Each of these provides different styles for different capabilities, all of which are designed to make life easier for you, as you don't have to create the styles. You just use them. But you need to learn how to use them and know what they provide. Let's look at how you could use Bootstrap to code a simple web page. To get Bootstrap linked to your HTML, you could point to a URL like this. This URL points to a Bootstrap CSS file, which is hosted on a CDN server, so somebody else's server. When you use a URL like this, you don't have to worry about hosting the CSS file on your own web server. But you do need to be aware that this server is something that you don't have control of and can sometimes be unavailable. Anyways, once you have the CSS file, you can start using the Bootstrap styles. One simple example to use rows and columns to style your information on the website. This would look like this, and you'd have one div with a row class attached to it, which contains multiple divs that has the call class. I pasted a piece of code that I wrote in the Sublime Text Editor. There are many options for code class to support multiple devices from mobile phones, tablets to desktop devices. Bootstrap will collapse columns when the screen size is under, and your column will be horizontal when the screen size is above breakpoints. For instance, the option for CoSM is for tablets. Small devices, the breakpoint is 768 pixels. Similarly, WholeMD is for desktop, medium devices, and its breakpoint is 992 pixels. This results in a web page that looks like this, 2 columns and a row with some dummy list items. As I just mentioned, these columns are responsive, which means that if you are on a smaller screen, the columns would move under each other automatically. Using something like Bootstrap can save you a lot of time, but you do have to learn how to use it. Using CSS Preprocessors, an advanced version of CSS, is also an option. It essentially is a framework or language that is used to create CSS styles with and can help in maintaining CSS documents more efficiently. Some examples of a CSS preprocessor would be Less, Myth, Stylus, and Sass. Your style code will subsequently vary to your preferred type of CSS preprocessors, like having variables with Less, which stands for Linear Style Sheet, a language extension that's very similar to CSS, but just with a few additional features. In this example, I used a variable named color that defines the color instead of having to type the actual color value in the properties of the style. You can use this for all places in your web application. Once you change the value of this variable, it will affect all elements that use this variable. In case you want to have a special color for other elements, just use another variable. Here, I've used add special color for heading 3 text. When you're done writing your styling code in your preprocessor, you'd have to compile it to generate CSS files. This can be done with a tool that comes with the preprocessor. Once compiled, you'll end up with a color value written out for each property, a regular CSS in other words. Similar to using CSS libraries, even though this approach could be efficient, it will require some time to get used to. If you want to update the color, just update the variable value. Now you know what CSS is and how you can create it, let's recap the key things that you should remember. CSS, or Cascading Style Sheets, is a styling mechanism for the web and a standard that describes selectors to select HTML elements, properties, and value attributes to assign styles to HTML elements. CSS is useful to separate style from content, where style is described from CSS documents and content HTML documents, with many other capabilities included. We've seen that there are different ways to use CSS. One of them is to write it from scratch, just as you can write HTML from scratch using editors or integrated development environments such as VS Code. Other ways of using CSS is by using a CSS library like Bootstrap, which provides pre-made styles, or to use CSS Preprocessors like Less, which provides you with dynamic features to write CSS in and simply gather into regular CSS files when you're done. In the next module, you'll learn how JavaScript enables the web to be interactive.